If these are the outcomes and the killing stops, they ought to give Donald Trump the Nobel Peace Prize.
Hold on.
Jonathan Haslam, should Donald Trump win the Nobel Peace Prize if he is able to bring together Ukraine and Russia in some type of new peace plan?
Well, the Nobel Peace Prize is a product of Norwegian social democracy. Norwegian social democrats decide who gets it. Obama was given one before he'd done anything. Henry Kissinger was given one after he bombed goodness knows how many people. I really, wasn't it with one of the Nobel Prize went to, that was a Swedish Nobel Prize, went to Bob Dylan for poetry. So I think Donald Trump is hanging around, getting sleepless nights, wondering whether he's going to win a prize. I think what he wants to do is to put his stamp on the US presidency, for the next decade. That's what he wants. He wants to go down in history as the great American president. So he has to be very careful. He really has to be very careful. If he seems to be giving in to Vladimir Putin, which is, what he's already being accused of by the media, as you say, then this could be damaging. So he has to really walk a tightrope on this one.
So can I just show you, Jonathan Haslam, the argument being made in Maga world? This is Scott Jennings. He's actually a brilliant pundit who has to go on CNN all the time, surrounded by lefty liberals who just hate everything he stands for. But have a look at how he made this argument, and I'll get you to respond off the back.
I'm willing to give the new administration some latitude to try to enact the political will of the people of the United States, and that is for this to come to an end. The political will to continue to funding an open-ended engagement is draining rapidly. I think you would acknowledge that. And so Trump here is a new broker on the field and has a chance to do something amazing, and that is to get these two people to stop fighting, and in that case would bring some stability to the continent of Europe. And, what he has to say publicly about Russia or Ukraine over the course of time, I guess I'm willing to give them some latitude if the ultimate result is this, what Pete Hegseth said initially, a sovereign and prosperous Ukraine, those were his words. The United States strikes a rare earth mineral deal with Ukraine. I would love that. And the governments in Europe decide that they do need to take a little more responsibility for their own national security. If these are the outcomes and the killing stops, they ought to give Donald Trump the Nobel Peace Prize.
Hold on.
I mean, you can see Jonathan Haslam uproar on the set. They were absolutely horrified at the mere suggestion. But what do you make of his argument?
Yeah, I mean, he's senior political commentator at CNN, and they kept him on just to show that they could employ a Republican as long as he didn't say too much. And now he can say a lot, which they're beginning to regret. No, I think, but, when you think about those things he stated, like a sovereign, prosperous Ukraine, repeating Trump, well, how far are we from that? This is, who's going to pay for all this? That's a question. I mean, Trump wants...
Indeed. Well, at that point, let me ask about the mineral deal that Trump is trying to put together. Is that fair?
I think it's Trump's way of saying, look, we paid, hundreds of billions of dollars to you for this war. We want our money back. We'll take it back out of your land, basically. And then that will give us a vested interest in the security of that. If you look at the map, most of that rare earth stuff is to the center, to the east of the country. So in other words, if the Americans are digging stuff out of the ground out there, it's unlikely the Russians are going to come in again. So this has to be a settlement for very, very long term. I think he did it partly as a kick in the face of the Chinese, because America doesn't want to be dependent on China for rare earth minerals. or the Canadians for that matter. So it's part of Trump's unilateralism, his economics of autarky, that proposition.
What about Starmer continuing to effectively sign a blank check for another
This is the
100
legacy
years?
from Whitehall from February 2023. I mean, it's bizarre. It's why don't we dream about going back to Zimbabwe? You know, I mean, it's absurd. I mean, okay, the Chagos Islands, will give those away and then pay for them to have them back, which is, you know, part of the complete illogic of this government's foreign policy. It's almost as illogical as their domestic policy. One can't see any sense in it. I'm afraid today, your point about access to information is critical. We cannot have a government that's making sensible decisions if the population of the country do not have access to plain fact. And the media has been ruining us for that point of view. It has to be, we have to go to social media for this. But an awful lot of the older generation have not yet done that. And the youngest generation are rejecting social media. So this is an issue. You cannot have a well-informed government without a well-informed electorate. And that's what we really have to aim at. And that's what you yourself are doing on your own account.
Yes, and I think the independent media is going to play a big role in this. I mean, we've already seen, actually, in the US, quite what a massive role they can play, because it was actually the independent media that really helped drive Trump back to the White House. But knowing everything you know, Jonathan, about the history of Russia, what plan do you think would bring the most sustainable peace? But first, the reason you're watching this show is that it's becoming increasingly difficult to trust mainstream media or the so-called fact checkers who claim to determine which facts are true. And there's good reason for that, given the debate over free speech, the controversy surrounding Brexit, and how Trump and other politicians challenging the status quo are portrayed. But I have the solution. It's called Ground News, and it's the best way to stay informed and cut through media bias and narratives so you can get the facts for yourself. Go to ground.news/outspoken to check it out. But I just want to show you this incredible app and website in action. So let's take the game-changing speech by US Vice President J.D. Vance to the Munich Security Conference, where he tore into European governments, including ours here in the UK, for the despicable retraction of free speech. You can see clearly in one place that 361 sources are covering the story. Ground News instantly shows how the story is being covered by the media, broken down by whether it leans to the left or the right, illustrated by its bias distribution service. If you scroll down, you can see every article about this topic broken down by the political position and ownership of the publication. So we can see for ourselves quite clearly that Newsmax and GB News gave fair and accurate coverage, focusing on how Vance finally had the guts to point out uncomfortable truths to European leaders. By stark contrast, the left-wing HuffPost claimed the speech left all of Europe aghast, while The Independent missed the lead altogether to focus on Vance's joke about Elon Musk, which he claims bombed. What's more, Ground News gets to know you personally, providing you with the news stories you're interested in while also analysing your own biases. My favourite feature is their blind spot feed, which surfaces upwards of 20 stories daily that you might not be hearing about because of the corruption of the mainstream media. Now, I know you love the news. That's why you're watching Outspoken, but like me, you don't trust the legacy media. So Ground News gives you the tools to understand the truth about what is going on in the world. It is the only way I read the news, allowing you to see through media bias and manipulative narratives, no more relying on MSM bias to define the truth for you. So go to ground.news/outspoken to check it out. Subscribe through my link for 40% off the Vantage plan, which is what I use for unlimited access. Ground News is subscriber funded, and supporting my sponsors also supports my work. So for less than a Netflix subscription, you can get all of the world's news in one place and think for yourself. Thank you, Ground News. This has been a total game changer. for me. So let me just repeat the address, ground.news/outspoken. But now, back to the show.
Well, I think if an agreement can be reached, which has to be a compromise on both sides in that battle are exhausted, right? But then what happens afterwards? Well, what appears to be happening to the world economy, and that takes us on another plane, is that sooner or later, probably within this year, the US stock market will tank. All this high-tech stuff, it'll tank, could go down by an extraordinary amount, and bring with it a lot of other countries as well. Remember, Norway and Switzerland's central bank bought up vast quantities of NVIDIA on the American Stock Exchange. Unbelievable. So what we have the potential for is economic industrial collapse in the next couple of years. How is anybody going to manage? But what's going to happen concurrently is a huge inflation of commodity prices in the world, from oil all the way through to sugar and everything else. Which country produces the largest quantity of industrial raw materials, commodities? It doesn't produce chrome, but it produces almost everything else. Russia. In other words, Russia actually has great potential in the next decade to become a very rich power again. So this peace could be regarded as an interlude, which will be needed, but Russia should take off. Russia can take off on its own after that point, provided we get some sort of settlement. The boys have to come home. One of the reasons Russia has raging inflation is it has a shortage of manpower. The manpower is being thrown into a sausage machine in Ukraine. That has to end.
It does. It does. And it has to end for so many reasons. Because I think seeing the state of Ukraine in those before and after pictures, and something Trump always talks about, but that really resonates with me. It's like, what was the point of this? What did you achieve, Boris Johnson? And we really do have to think about that. And that's why I find it so frustrating, I guess, for Starmer to just be so blinkered in terms of his position. But Jonathan Haslam, thank you so much. You are the expert in this. I really wanted to have you on to provide the context on this story that you just do not receive in the mainstream media. And I have to hugely recommend this book. It is absolutely brilliant. Hubris, The Origins of Russia's War Against Ukraine. Must read. Very, very important book. And thank you so much to Jonathan Haslam, Fellow of the British Academy and Emeritus Professor in the History of International Relations at the University of Cambridge. An absolute pleasure to have you today. Thank you so much for watching Dan Wootton Outspoken. Please click on my face just to the bottom left to subscribe to this brand new independent news source and turn on the notification bell so you'll be alerted to our brand new live shows, uncancelled interviews, and special royal episodes. Outspoken is also now available as a podcast, so you can listen to the show every weekday on the go, wherever you are.